After the pandemic, there are a lot of black swan events happening around the globe. This is a very vulnerable market, and among these markets of uncertainties, do you think tech is the factor of certainty to revive the world economy?
Yeah, in this case, actually I believe tech is neutral. Right, so it can actually exacerbate some of the uncertainties, right? It accelerates the release of news. Tools can be available to hackers or other individuals, and so it can actually amplify negative events that take place. It can also be used as a positive tool, right? So the same relay of information during a crisis can actually get a rapid response coming sooner. You have new tools available through drone technologies, satellite sensing that can support. So whatever the crisis might be, whether it's a health crisis, a financial crisis, a natural disaster, in all of these cases, the technology, I think, can play a role in either direction. So then the question is, how do we use it, and how do we train people to use the tools effectively to maximize the opportunities that follow from the technology, as well as mitigating the potential downsides and negative consequences that application can have.
How can digitalization empower the traditional industries, especially the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, I think there's huge opportunities here for the digitization. We actually see factories now installing 5G networks inside the factory. They're using 8K television screens have very precise measurement, data analytics on the flow line.
Yeah, our media headquarters is already using that right now, the 8K broadcasting.
And so these types of things can actually be brought into the factory, and where we see then is actually moving workers from an assembly line in the factory, and actually they need to be upskilled, and we can actually help support them to move into new roles. I mean, we even see situations that robots are being utilized in the factories, and robots used to build the robots that are there. So I see a lot of opportunities in that space. I've heard from several people that actually China's in the forefront of that. So I've visited some Chinese factories and speak to colleagues as well.
Do you think so? You heard people say that, but do you think so after you take tours in the Chinese factories?
Yeah, so definitely the utilization of some of these newest technologies, I think the Chinese are actually much more entrepreneurial in their willingness to try that and take the approach. Also, as we see, is the address with the labor shortages, with the urban-rural migrations, you see the aging population. All these elements actually drive a need to shift the labor element. Now, of course, within China, you have a very wide continuum. I've seen factories where people are still using cardboard boxes and carrying around nuts and dropping them off at stations, and then I've seen fully automated lines. But for the most part, I actually see the successful companies are the ones that are actually effectively and successfully using new digital tools and capabilities, and they're often actually using it to empower workers rather than only replace workers. So it's when you use that tool in combination with the worker that you actually get the greatest benefits.
So we continue to talk a little bit more about the digitalization. And digitalization, this process can provide new opportunities to empower the traditional industry, but also it can create new industries and new jobs as well. So what kind of new opportunities can AI bring to the new round of digitalization?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple fundamental sectors that I would look at. One would be in agriculture. I mean, this is a really fundamental human need. So we don't necessarily need social media, but we all need food. So we start using the technology there. The other is in healthcare, and a third is in education. But if I go in a little bit more depth in healthcare, for example, you have everything from preventative medicine, so by being able to understand the symptoms, the cases, collecting data, we can actually prevent illnesses and improve well-being. And then if you do need to make a treatment, you can actually share and exchange data on what the best treatments are, start to have personalized medicine and follow-up through the treatment stage, and then also the development of new medicines. So in all these cases, technology can play a really positive role in improving a fundamental aspect of human well-being, which is health.
I've noticed that one of the key agenda of this year's Davos Forum is about the generative AI. And we have a specific agenda called generative AI friend or foe. So how do we build a global framework to balance the risk of AI and the potential benefits of artificial intelligence?
Existential risks of AI. Personally, I think there's much more significant risk, whether it's around climate change, geopolitical conflict, divisions within society. All of these for me feel like much more existential risks.
It doesn't mean that urgent.
They're more urgent. It doesn't mean that there aren't risks with AI, but these are actually manageable. So I think one of the first steps is actually to bring knowledgeable people to talk around the topics. There's a tendency sometimes in media to amplify the headline that will get the most clicks. And if we propose that the world's going to end from killer robots, it makes people quite anxious. But we actually want to have an informed discussion to see, okay, so what are the risks? How do we manage those? How do we have to actually update our guidelines for how we use the technology there? What's the governance around that? And different countries, different sectors will have different governance needs. So that, managing AI in healthcare is completely different from how you might manage it in manufacturing. And last is we do need some guardrails on some agreed places where we definitely shouldn't be using artificial intelligence. And that discussion will be best suited if we bring people together from different sectors, from both industry, academia, and civil society, as well as policymakers.
But do you think that we do need a global cooperation framework to regulate some basic guidelines and also some principles to develop artificial intelligence? Because as we can see that the competition now is so fierce among countries, and make it impossible for any country to put a stop on the development of AI. So that factor may lead to the loss of control of the artificial intelligence development.
That's right. I think we need some underlying principles, right? Okay, so how do we source data? How do we avoid biases in the data? What are we designing towards? What is the use case or the utilization of these things? And then those may require different responses. So again, if I make a mistake in a headline because it's generated by generative AI, it can be damaging. If I make a mistake because I used it in an operating room for an operation, then it can have a much more damaging effect. And of course, there's extreme cases, but we do need to manage these more based on principles rather than a specific regulatory framework.
If we look at the theme of this year's Davos Forum, it is entrepreneurship, the new driving forces of the world economy. So how do you interpret the entrepreneurship, especially in the digital age?
Yeah, I think so. For the first point for entrepreneurship is actually to be able to look at an existing situation and say, look, I have the commitment and passion to actually drive and bring forward an alternative solution, a new approach. And if we look at all the changes that have taken place in the last 5 years, the world looks very different. So we need new approaches, new solutions. And the entrepreneurs are the ones who say, okay, I don't need to use the old approaches, the old models. I'm actually going to bring something forward. And often there will be resistance because there's existing interests who find it competitive, or maybe they tell you, okay, that hasn't been done before. And entrepreneurs are the ones who actually have the commitment and the passion to continue pursuing their dream, even when people don't necessarily recognize the opportunities and the benefits. And they're also willing to fail and take risks, take chances, and then keep trying. And so I think entrepreneurship, when we say that's a driving force for the global economy, it's that spirit that we're driving towards a better outcome for people, a more harmonious society, and better lives and well-being for all the individuals. So this is really the spirit of entrepreneurship and what we seek to promote here.
So what kind of efforts and work we can put together to decrease the digital gap?
We see the case in India where as new telecom operators entered the market, it dropped the price so that the majority of citizens today in India have a mobile phone. And actually this has basically improved the quality of life of all the individuals, right? They can access information on, even if the majority of the population are farming, access better information on the weather, on market prices, do the exchange. All these have a corresponding benefit. So one of the best things we can do is actually scale up the use of technologies responsibly so that the cost falls and they become much more accessible. And I think this will help bridge the divide. And then we need to look at mechanisms within countries to make sure that they're used effectively, responsibly, and we can use fiscal mechanisms to say, okay, how we want to recognize some of the wealth differentials between different individuals.
China is accelerating its speed to develop the digital economy, and this kind of economy has accounted for 40% of the total GDP in China. So how does this kind of acceleration can bring new driving forces to recover the world economy?
Yeah, so I think one is just when the Chinese economy functions well, it's a huge difference. You know, I believe the GDP is not quite $20 trillion today, but so even at 5% growth, that would be almost $1 trillion increase.
Good point.
And that's a huge contribution in global terms. You know, most countries don't have
because
that kind
many
of GDP.
skeptics said that the era of the high growth, high economic growth of China is over, and they're do not allow China anymore. So
yeah, so if you look at it in relative terms, yes, the growth is declining. I remember sometimes when it was up over 10%. And it's coming down. I mean, this is natural as the economy grows larger. If you look at it absolute terms, a contribution of $1 trillion in addition to the global economy makes a major contribution, not only within China, but also the effects. So the more China is interconnected with the rest of the world, the better benefit that has. I mean, even with some of the tensions that we've seen geopolitically, trade is actually at a record high between the US and China. And so this is a win-win situation where both countries have something that they would like to exchange with the other, and there's a benefit to both sides in that. And then when you take that and extend that out through the entire global economy, that's a positive contribution and positive benefit.
You've mentioned win-win, but we can see that United States have put some cheap restrictions to China, and there are other competition, fierce competition is going on around the globe. So under these circumstances, how do you think we can boost the global cooperation, especially in technology sector today?
Yeah, so I think competition is healthy. Cooperation is also necessary. So we need a model that there will be some domains where there's competition between US, Europe, China, other key economies. But there's other areas that we benefit from having global standards. So if everyone needs a different mobile phone, to use a different country or accessing different elements there, this will actually end up being a tax on all global citizens, regardless of where they live. So this is a very delicate area, and I think what we want to promote is actually ongoing dialogue and mutual understanding between multiple parties, regardless of where they come from. National strategy will be competitive, which is okay, but we need to make sure that we're competing in the right areas and that we're also cooperating in the most important ones.